The Chicago Great Western was a Midwestern rail company that started in 1885 and ended in 1968. It ran from Chicago to Owine, Iowa, to Minneapolis, south to Kansas City. It carried passengers up till 1962 and converted to freight only. Being in the Midwest, the main freight was livestock. The main line went through several nearby towns. These stops included East Stockton, Woodbine, Elizabeth, North Hanover, Rawdon, and the Whitson Tunnel. Coming east into Joe Davis County from Chicago, our first stop is the maintenance yard in East Stockton.
Here we are outside of Stockton at what was formerly known as East Stockton. East Stockton was created by the Chicago Great Western in 1909 and was completed in 1912. The need for East Stockton arose when the Chicago Great Western officials realized that the grade between the Mississippi River and Stockton was too great for normal locomotives to climb without any assistance. Located at East Stockton was a 15-stall roundhouse, a coal chute, and an ice house. They also stationed helper engines at East Stockton to assist the trains in climbing the steep grade. East Stockton was finally closed in 1930 after only 21 years of service, mainly because the railroad purchased and built new Texas-style and Mallet-style engines which could handle the grade.
Stockton was one of many towns that sprung up along the Chicago Great Western. Before Stockton was founded, there was a settlement called Morrisville. However, once the railroad came through, most people left Morrisville in hopes of a new life in Stockton. Majority of Stockton's first businesses arrived because of the railroad. The introduction of cars to Joe Davis County led to the construction of a bridge across the tracks at Stockton. The increase of cars contributed to the tearing down of the wooden bridge, and a new concrete bridge was put in its place in 1959. This increase of cars had an immediate impact on passenger service. In 1956, passenger service ended, leading to the tearing down of Stockton Station in 1959. The dispatcher's office remained at Stockton to control railroad traffic. Freight service continued even after the rival Chicago Northwestern bought out the Chicago Great Western. The next stop on the line is Woodbine.
Here we are at the Woodbine train station. This was not a very significant stop to the Chicago Great Western, as it only had a creamery, a stockyard, and a feed mill. The Woodbine station has been moved from the original spot only about 100 yards. Our next stop is Elizabeth. The tracks go that way.
The next stop on the Chicago Great Western was the small yet bustling community of Elizabeth. Elizabeth was not another railroad town, for it had already been incorporated in 1868, and the railroad did not pass through town until 20 years later. However, Elizabeth benefited greatly because of the transportation and business opportunities that the railroad provided.
Elizabeth was a modest-sized town on the Chicago Great Western. It had 2 creameries, a lumberyard, a stockyard, a feed mill.
All of these businesses still exist with the exception of the creameries. Chicago Great Western Railroad Depot on Myrtle Street in downtown Elizabeth was constructed in 1888 and is now listed on the National Register of Historic Sites. The Elizabeth Depot and its section crew number 20 serviced the Whitson Tunnel located to the west. Elizabeth, after the railroad had begun passing through, quickly became the farming center of the county. Elizabeth used to have a bridge that spanned the railroad tracks. The bridge has been torn down since the Chicago Great Western was bought out and the Chicago Northwestern pulled out the lines in 1973.
After I graduated from college, I needed some money, so the railroad was being pulled out. I really wasn't working with the railroad itself. I was working for a group of people that was tearing the rails out. And a friend of mine, David Hanover, who I used to room with in college for a couple of years, was working there, and he said I should come, and we started ripping out rails. So I think it was, I want to say the summer of '72. Well, our job was, the rail was off. Our job was to take a 10-foot crowbar and pull the spikes out of the plates. Pick the plates up and throw them into a bucket.
To the west of Elizabeth was the North Hanover station. There was a long 2.5-mile siding which was used often for meeting the longer trains. It also has a small stockyard to service local farmers, as most stations did at the time. For many years, a branch went south about 3 miles to the town of Hanover. It was the distinction of being one of the few small branch lines to operate for a profit during the Great Depression, mainly because of its small, fuel-efficient Plymouth switch engine it used. The profitable business it served were the woolen mill, lumber yard, and coal yard. The branch line to Hanover was abandoned in the late 1940s after a decline in the production of the woolen mill. The highlight of the North Hanover station was on June 2, 1951 at 8:22 a.m. There was a wreck on the Chicago Great Western lines at North Hanover. Westbound train number 55 and eastbound train number 52 collided head-on at an average speed of 22 miles an hour. Now we make the climb to the Winston Tunnel, the longest in the state.
And here's our final stop, the Winston Tunnel. In 1886, the Minnesota Northwestern Rail Company, owned by A.B. Stickney, contracted the Shepherd Winston and Company to construct the longest tunnel ever built in Illinois. Constructed near Galena, it was over a half-mile long and would connect Freeport, Illinois with Dubuque, Iowa. It took 2 years and 354 workers to complete. The hill the tunnel went through was mistakenly thought to be limestone. It was instead soft blue Makokata shale. This caused tremendous difficulty in the construction because it had to be dug entirely by hand. Consequently, the tunnel had to be lined with timber, which would cause problems later on. The labor was done mostly by immigrants and was dangerous, as one person, John Hill, died during the construction process. Before the Minnesota Northwestern train could ever travel on the new tracks or through the tunnel, the Chicago Great Western, another Stickney line, bought the tracks. Problems with the tunnel were immediate. The tunnel's timber-lined wall deteriorated almost immediately after the installation. Because of this, the workers had to reconstruct the inside of the tunnel with a new concrete wall protected with a brick layer covering in 1902. Another problem that resulted from the original construction of the Great Tunnel was an uneven floor that did not allow water to flow out of the tunnel, leaving puddles in the tunnel. Third major problem trains and workers experienced in the tunnel was the lack of ventilation, and a thick buildup of smoke would form every time trains rolled through the tunnel. A giant smokestack was originally built with the tunnel to negate smoke buildup, but this did not seem to work. When the lack of ventilation became too much for the workers and the conductors to handle, the Chicago Great Western ended up building a giant fan at the west end of the tunnel to blow the smoke out of the east end. The last train went through the Winston Tunnel on October 31st, 1971. Now all that is left are the decomposing ties and the collapsing tunnel.
After exiting the Winston Tunnel, the Chicago Great Western made its way across the majestic Mississippi River to its yard at Dubuque Fairgrounds, and from there to its hub in Oelwein, Iowa, and then split to Minnesota and Kansas. Today only a few stations still exist on the eastern division of the Chicago Great Western, and all railroad tracks have been torn up. Yet many people have pleasant memories of the small town stops along the Chicago Great Western. But the real memories are only in the minds of those who were there in the beginning.